A dive takes less than 3 seconds. And in that less than 3 seconds is total chaos. It's a free fall. And in that less than 3 seconds, that chaos is your creation.
Hello, welcome to Impact the World, where my guest today is Greg Louganis. Many of you will know Greg as an Olympic hero. He consecutively won gold in the men's diving championships in the 80s, but he has also had a New York Times bestseller, an acting career. He specializes in peak performance and also recently has been training dogs who perform. So he's got such an interesting story and so many different things that he has done in his life that it was great to talk to him about his experience of all of those, and particularly being a pioneer as a gay man who was out at a time when not many were. And I asked him near the end of the interview, what's it like to be someone whose story precedes him? We all know how stories can define us, but can also cause projection and public perceptions that aren't necessarily true. So we touch on that near the end of the interview, but this was a great conversation. Greg was a wonderful guest and I really loved it. So I hope you enjoy hearing more from and learning about Greg Louganis. Greg, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's so great to be here.
Yeah. I know when we first met earlier this year, I shared with you that you were very impactful for me when I was probably a late teen, and at the time I knew I was gay, but there weren't many role models at all at that time. It was still very stigmatized to be out as a gay person. So there were a few figures, and I remember I was a fan of Annie Leibovitz and her work.
Yeah.
And I was going through a book of hers, and I came to this beautiful picture of you underwater.
Yeah.
And it was like Greg Louganis, diver. And then I learned more about you and I became fascinated. And I wasn't someone who was a sports person at all, but I was like, oh, this is really cool. There's an out sports person in the world. And so I was really curious about your story. So it's been great to get to meet you this year and hang out with you and learn a bit more about you and your life and your path.
Yeah, thank you. It was so funny because thanks to Annie, the way I've worked with Annie a number of times, and it seems like every other photo shoot is just like a home run, you know. And that was one of the photos. It was in this tank underwater, and so I was doing Jeffrey in New York. It's about gay dating and in the 80s and AIDS and all that. Paul Rudnick wrote that, and I played Darius. And so I was going out to dinner with a friend of mine. We'd go into the restaurant to be seated, and my friend said, oh, that was Annie Leibovitz. I said, oh my God, I gotta go talk to her. And so I went to Annie and I said, can I use that photo for the cover of my book? And she goes, oh my God, yes, Greg, you know. And so then she allowed us to use that photo for the cover of my book. And that sold a lot of books.
It did, I'm sure.
Just that photo alone.
Well, I know that you were a #1 on the New York Times bestseller for a number of weeks,
5 weeks.
Yeah, so it was a big book, but
it was so funny because I went, that's not my world, literary, and so I was on book tour with my co-author Eric Marcus, and we were #1 New York Times bestseller, and he's like bouncing off the wall. I was like, oh, yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
And then it happened again and again, and then. He said, Greg, you don't understand. In the literary world, that's like an Olympic gold medal. So we got 5 Olympic gold medals. I said, oh, okay, now I get it, So he had to communicate it on a level that I would understand.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is a big question, and I guess you have 40 years of experience to be able to look back on this, but how was it for you being a pioneer at a time where we didn't have many gay role models who were comfortable enough or felt safe enough to be out in the world? How was that journey for you? Because I imagine it was very, very difficult, even though now I look at you and go, okay, well, Greg was one of our pioneers, and it's an important role to play. But I also know those roles can be very tough and hard on you. But the fact that you were celebrated with a hit book and all of the love that came at you because of the Olympics and your success there, how did you process that at the time, or did you not process it and you just lived through it and now you look back on it in a certain way?
Well, I mean, obviously the first person that you have to come out to is yourself. And so I went away to college, University of Miami, as far away from California, Southern California, as I could get and stay on this continent. And I was in the drama department, so I found other people who were, gay, and so it gave me a comfort. And so that it was that process, and got to a point. I remember, because I signed after the '84 Olympic Games, I signed on with the William Morris Agency, and because I was supposed to retire. And the agent said, play the gay thing down, don't, not to be out, And so I was like, oh, okay. So it was just my policy not to discuss my personal life with members of the media. And at that time, the journalist respected that.
Yeah.
There was plenty to read between the lines, that you could figure it out. And also, I was out to my friends and family, and that was an issue, when I was diving, because the dive team is really small. And oftentimes they would have a meeting. I wasn't invited to see who was going to run with the fag.
Wow.
And so, and it's funny because like a lot of people want to point to homophobia, but I know these guys, I've met them, and it's like, it was more jealousy, try to get under my skin, kind of thing, because I was winning.
Right.
And so very little of it was homophobia, it was just, a way to try and get to me.
Right. And you had this incredible winning streak. What was that like for you? Because was that just in you since childhood, that you were either trained by others to win, or you personally believed? I mean, I've never been in anything like that, so I'm curious what that's like.
Okay, so initially it came from a really desperate place, because my father worked long hours. I'm adopted, so I felt like a throwaway child. And that was kind of playing in the background. And so if I could be thrown away once, I can be thrown away again. And so with the diving, my father got really involved in my diving. So I had in my head, in order to be worthy of being loved, I had to win. And so it came from a really desperate place. It wasn't healthy. And so, so that was, it did come from a desperate place, because I was trying to, to gain worthiness of being loved.
And then the experience of that must get magnified when you've got all of these people in the public arena rooting for you, and the pressure, I guess, changes from familial to me versus the world, or me in relationship to the world.
Yeah. The other thing that that really pushed me too is early on in my diving career, Dr. Samuel Lee coached me to my first Olympics, and he always said, you're only as good as your last competition. And so you always had to continue to prove yourself again and again and again. And so that, became really important to me. The coach, but that's a competitive mindset, right? It's all about, it's very limiting. It's me against you, and it's very limiting. My coach, who coached me for the last 10 years of my diving career, Ron O'Brien, he understood I wasn't a competitor. I'm not competitive. And people shake their heads, like, well, you won all these medals. No, I'm not competitive. I'm a performer. And there's a shift in that, is that I will coach somebody to beat me because, I was really shy, so I kept to myself. But if anybody asked, I tell them how to beat me. Because I knew that if they did better, that would elevate my performance. So it's about the creation, and one of the things that I realized is that a dive takes less than 3 seconds. Less than 3 seconds. And in that less than 3 seconds is total chaos. Because there's no wires, there's nothing. It's a free fall. And in that less than 3 seconds, that chaos is your creation. So I feel like I've been really blessed because I did flying diving, and in a major diving competition, I had 11 dives on 3-meter springboard. I had 10 dives on 10-meter platform. I go through prelims, 11 dives. Go through finals, another 11 dives, 22. 10-meter platform, I have prelims and finals, so that's 42 opportunities to practice peak performance. So I got an opportunity to kind of figure this stuff out, which was really cool. And it's fun too, because that was one thing that my coach tapped into, knowing my personality, Ron O'Brien. He would make things into a game. In order for me to break 700 on 10-meter platform, which was, a huge milestone. That was like the 4-minute mile, I had to average 8.5s or better on all 10 dives that I executed. And so we play that game. And it was funny because we were training in Miami, gale force winds, the rain is coming in sideways, blowing into the platform. He goes, okay, 700 game. I was like, oh, okay. So I got all warmed up and ready to go. And then I started. I was jumping back and forth over that 8.5 mark. And then it came down to my last dive, which was my most difficult dive, reverse 3.5. And I think I needed 8s on that. And I did it, and he gave me a 9. I was like, I did it. So I broke 700 in practice. And that's something that a lot of the kids that I work with, they don't understand. If you want to break world records, you're going to do it in practice before you do it in front on the world stage.
Yeah.
And you have to train that way.
We'll be right back to the conversation in just a moment, so stay tuned. Hello, I am thrilled to announce that we are bringing Soul Magic to La Jolla, California in July 2025. Soul Magic is an immersive, week-long experience where like-minded, like-hearted souls come from all over the world. We gather together, and as we go through the week, it's a magical mystery ride together of whatever themes are showing up in the room, information coming through the channels, the music that we bring into the room, and the sharing of community. These weeks are always transformative. This is our 6th one, and we're really excited to be near San Diego in this beautiful beach town, La Jolla, and we can't wait to welcome you there for Soul Magic 2025. For you, when you were on the world stage, were you very aware of that, or were you able to just go into this zone that you had already adopted in practice? Were you able to shut all that noise out, or did you feel like an extra crackle of energy when you were doing all of that?
Well, it was funny because there was one competition. It was an Olympic festival in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They had this whole Beat the Fag campaign going on. And I knew
that was coming from what, outside?
From the other divers.
Okay.
And so, it was very pervasive. And so I was letting it get to me. And I went to our sports psychologist. I didn't really work with Don Green, but he was always there and always observing. But I reached out to him and I said, this stuff is getting to me. It usually doesn't. I said, what do I do? And he said, well, just, take a breath. Imagine this beautiful white light, coming down through your head and just filling your body and giving you this protective energy. I was like, oh, okay. And I walked away and he's thinking, oh my God, if he tells anyone that I just told him that, I'm going to get fired. It was like, he was like freaking out, but I got it. I understood that, this protective white light, it's like, yeah, it's like, yeah.
And now you're someone who is very much with spiritual practices and spirit, but back then that would have still been, I mean, there's that phrase that people use these days, woo-woo, right?
Right.
It would have been somewhat woo-hoo, which is also why he didn't want you to talk about it.
Yeah. And the thing is, I mean, there were some people who were receptive, and also, I mean, I would share awarenesses, share, like, I would listen to the diving board. That was my music. That was a percussion. Because like when I was 9 years old, my coach kept saying, ride the board, ride the board, ride the board. I said, what do you mean? And I was only like 8 or 9 years old. And he said, well, when you lift up into your hurdle, then you'll hear the board beat against the fulcrum twice. Beat, beat, and then you'll be landing on the board. So I could hear it. I understood that as a dancer. So that became my music. That became my percussion. So I knew when I was going to be in sync with the board or make the little adjustments in order to be with the diving board, either draw my knees up to delay making contact with the board, to be in sync with the board. And there was one other diver that I shared that with. He goes, oh my God, I listen to the board too. It's not a common practice. I also use all of my senses. We were at World Championships in Madrid, Spain. The facility in Madrid, there's this big dome over the platform. So it's really bright, bright, bright. And it's indoors, and then you fall through shadows, and then the pool is kind of lit. And so when you're spinning, and you're spinning really fast, then your eyes are dilating trying to adjust. So I wasn't picking my spots up, because you want to see where you're going in order to know where you are spatially in the air. It was an indoor pool. One of the things that is consistent is that in an indoor pool, the smell of chlorine wafts off the surface of the water. So when I was rotating, I could smell the chlorine and it'd go away. It'd smell the chlorine and go away. Smell the chlorine, and then that's where I was supposed to come out. And then on 3-meter springboard, front 3.5, there was a spray that you could hear on the surface of the water because it's dead quiet. Everybody's quiet at diving, right before the dive. And you could hear the spray on the surface of the water. So then it would get louder and it'd go away. It'd get louder and go away. It'd get louder, and then I'd know where the water was. So having that awareness of utilizing all of your senses to be able to aid you in your success. People didn't talk about that was woo-woo.
Yeah.
Well,
I know that peak performance is really your mastery. And I also know that you teach it, you coach, you mentor. How is it for you now being able to, I guess, in times like 2024, bring all of that in a way that perhaps no one would have been able to 40 years ago, or it would have been a bit more frowned on? Is it nice to be able to come in in a fuller way?
People are more open. People are much more open to those thoughts, ideas, and practices. It's like, and so much of it is the meaning we give things, right? So it's all about the meaning we give things. So it is really kind of opening up that awareness and interpretation. So like if I were, this happened to me in a show. Okay, so I was doing a one-man show. The only thing worse you could have told me, it was 14 different characters. The homework that I did for each character, and I didn't question, but each character had a different color. I don't know why, if it was cadence or emotional state or whatever, but each character had a different color. And so the second night with an audience, I was told that I could stop and start, that this is still rehearsal-esque, but I went up on the second scene and I was thinking, oh my God, the script is backstage. It's in my dressing room. The stage manager's working lights, so I can't call line. And then I thought of the color, and it brought me right back into the performance. And I was talking to Dr. Don Green about that. I shared that experience with him, and he said, you know what, Craig, you probably weren't down that long, because he was also the psychologist at Juilliard. So he was, working with a lot of high performance type athletes as well as performers. And he said, you probably weren't down that long, because performance lives in your right brain. When you're thinking logic, where the script is and all that, that's left brain. But when you thought of color, that's right brain, which brought you back into the performance. It's like, oh my God, which it explained the way that my brain works. Because if I was off balance in my takeoff, I could feel it, I could sense it, then how I would understand that, it is change of rhythm. Change the tempo, because that's right brain. Because if you in a dive, it takes less than 3 seconds. If you're going to analyze or judge, then that's left brain. And then to go to your left brain to make adjustments in your right brain, you're in the water. It's over.
Yeah.
But if you can maintain staying in your right brain by utilizing color, sense of smell, sensation, rhythm, then you can stay in that performance. You can stay in that flow.
It's interesting to me hearing you elaborate on how sensory all of this is and always has been for you, because I know that one of the things that you do these days is you are a dog trainer.
Yeah.
And, and so it kind of, I knew your affinity with animals, I knew your affinity with dogs, but hearing your perception and the way that you experience the world, I'm like, of course, no wonder you have this empathy and understanding of what the dog is experiencing and what they need.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the key to that unlocks, that door into that window is play.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about play. It's all about fun, and making that, a part of the process.
To jump back to the Olympics for a second, you've shared with me that you've been part of the Olympic Committee and you've been working around diversity, inclusion. How has that been for you? Now a 40-year relationship with the Olympics? Or
Well, I'm not officially working with the International Olympic Committee, or I was on the board for a time for the United States Olympian and Paralympian Association. I was part of that.
And you just got back from Paris. You were in Paris, yeah, for the Olympics this year.
But I'm working with LA28, and one of the reasons why I got involved, I'm doing a 1-year fellowship, and the reason why I got involved is because I had done Vishen's event, and it was very mindful. It was very conscientious about the carbon footprint. You spend an extra euro for the containers, then you get it in the right bin, and then you credit that euro back. And I was like, wow, and no plastic bottles. It was, you have your own bottle and fill it. And then 2 weeks later, I go to Fukuoka, Japan for the World Aquatic Championships. And it was just such a huge contrast. They had single-use plastic bento boxes, for the volunteers, which were thousands. And it was just like, oh my God, when the president of the World Aquatics asked me, he said, Greg, what do you think of the World Championships? You haven't been here in a while. I said, oh my God, lots of plastic. I said, you know what, we're in a water sport. We do have open water swims, and all of the athletes are try to be very conscientious about the environment, because that's in their conscience. And I just said, I feel like we should be doing better. And so that's the reason why I wanted to make sure, going to LA 28, are we doing everything we can to be responsible, to be kind, kind to Mother Earth, but also kind when it comes to inclusion, because our big hurdle right now is transgender inclusion, but there's so much misinformation that's already so pervasive that people don't understand. And so what I challenge them is in their thoughts and actions, is it kind? And most of it isn't.
What would you say are some of the biggest barriers or misconceptions in that area when it comes to
that a mediocre male athlete is going to have a sex change so they can be competitive on the world stage?
Right.
That's so insanely crazy, because they couldn't make it. And also, I had an experience when I was diagnosed HIV positive 6 months prior to the Olympic Games in '88.
Yeah.
I went to DC, met with Anthony Fauci, and he made available to me AZT. And so they put me on AZT right away. And I didn't have anybody to talk to about my treatment or anything like that, the medication side effects and all that. And I was literally, I was crawling from my bed in the morning to the bathroom to pour myself the hottest bath that I could stand to soak for 20 minutes before I could walk and touch my toes to function. I thought I was overtraining. That's where my head went. It's like, because the Chinese had caught up to me, and I was running for my life, in training. And so I thought that I was just overtraining. All these years later, I read up on the side effects of AZT. One of the side effects is depletion of testosterone. So virtually my muscles were eating themselves because they had no fuel. And I looked, I don't usually look at videos of me diving or anything like that, but I watched just a year before Pan American Games and Nationals in comparison to my performance in '88. In '88, I wasn't jumping as high, I wasn't spinning as fast, I could see it through new lenses. And it was like, wow. So I understand when somebody, my transgender friends who've shared their experience with me, because a lot of those experiences kind of paralleled my experience. When you start depleting the testosterone, you're starving, those muscles because they're not getting fuel. They atrophy, as well as with the hormone replacement, their bodies change. So when they make a blanket statement, a young boy goes through, if he went through puberty, he's had this testosterone wash, and so that's an unfair advantage. It's very, misleading, because if you're starving the muscles and they don't have the fuel, then they're going to atrophy. So, strength and all of that, and endurance, stamina, that's depleted. So the bottom line I always tell people is ask yourself, before your words and your thoughts, is it kind? You know?
It's interesting because, you know, you bring us back to the point in your history where you received a lot of pushback and stigma because of HIV. You were one of the first people that was out about your HIV status. We know that whole decade was awful for the community, not just in terms of the deaths, and they were vast, but in terms of the way the public responded. And then there were certain leaders in the public who were focal points, who were allies. It's interesting, isn't it? We look at transgender issues now, and I kind of go back 30 odd years, and there's, you know, I'm not someone who's living the transgender experience, so I can't speak to that experience, but I often look at it, feels similar to me to what gays and lesbians were going through to some degree in the 80s. Of course, it's very different details, but that same level of inflamed reaction from people. People have thoughts and feelings about things that they haven't really looked into, researched, understood. It's that same othering and fear. And of course, as with any area of our life, what we actually need to do if something's complicated or something that's new to us is learn, understand, try and help each other unpack it. But it does seem to be one of the inflammatory topics right now. And it just makes me go back to you and what you had to go through. Was it hard to be someone who was a bit of a public hero, and then all of a sudden the story changes and people turn, and kind of, how did you deal with that personally?
Well, it's interesting because I knew, like, the, you know, surrounding HIV and the timing, you know, a lot of the attitude was, oh, it's killing the right people, you know, gay men, IV drug users, prostitutes. So, you know, and it's like, you know, it's a virus. It's not, you know, it's a virus. It's, not, you know. But in, you know, when I, you know, came forward with all of that information, being on Barbara Walters 2020 and then Oprah, that was one of the things that I said in the interviews, like, you know, with Barbara. I said, you know, anybody who didn't feel that they've been touched by HIV and they cheered for me, they can no longer say that they haven't been touched by HIV, you know? So it opened the door for communication, you know, for people to talk, you know. And if I was a scapegoat, because, you know, the pervasive thought was, oh, it's killing the right people, you know, that there was this, you know, judgment. And also when I was traveling across the US, I know, because I was an Olympic gold medalist, a lot of people who were homophobic or, you know, just really, you know, not kind, you know, surrounding the whole question of HIV and sexuality, they gave me a pass. You know, they gave me a pass that others wouldn't. One thing, I was speaking in Ohio, and I remember it was, I share my story, and so after, you know, I you know, met the crowd and all that stuff, and this really tall man comes up to me, and, you know, very distinguished, and he said, "Thank you." He said, "You helped me understand my gay son. I've really been struggling with that." I was like, "Can I give you a hug?"
Yeah.
You know, it's just to have, you know, to share that. You know, because when I wrote Breaking the Surface, I thought I was sharing all of my weaknesses.
So this was the biography that sat at the top of the New York Times bestseller list. So you thought you were sharing all of your weaknesses in that book?
Yeah.
Aha.
Sharing, you know, I started when I started school. I'm dyslexic. You know, so I didn't get great, you know, very good grades. My, you know, sexuality, HIV. I was in an abusive relationship. You know, it was like all of these things that those were my perceived weaknesses. But what I learned on the book tour is by sharing my perceived weaknesses, I was actually sharing my strength. Because I remember we were in Atlanta, and there was this beautiful, I mean, she was like an Amazon, police officer. And she looked like this gorgeous Amazon woman, and she handed me a bullet. And she said, "This signifies that I will take a bullet for you."
Wow.
Thank you. We both started weeping. I mean, we were just like sobbing, hugs and all. But it was just so beautiful.
Wow.
So beautiful.
It's funny, isn't it? Because we're talking about your book coming out at a time where I think societally there was still this idea about don't talk about your weaknesses, talk about your successes. And I mean, I've spoken to you about this privately when we've spoken. Like, one of the things that I always found most inspiring wasn't what someone achieved,
right,
but was what was going on for them behind the scenes, and how did they navigate it, or how did they get through it, or they didn't get through it, but they survived. And it was always those stories that reminded me, no matter what's going on in the world or in your world that day, life is this wave, and we're all here learning our lessons and going through the tough stuff and the good stuff, and it's all a bit of a wash.
Yeah.
And that's really the service that you were providing back then by, I would say, fully humanizing yourself.
Yeah.
And that would have been especially important, not just as a successful Olympian, but also as a gay man at a time where we were still, gay people were still othered and put in a box. We weren't considered human. We were considered this thing, or this, oh, that's a bit inconvenient, or my religion says this is wrong. Yeah. So, all of that pushback. So it's pretty phenomenal. It doesn't surprise me that the book sat on the New York Times bestseller list for that period, because it clearly was one of many ambassadors at that time, just as you were an ambassador at that time for changing the paradigm.
Yeah, to move that energy. Yeah, really. And that's something really interesting, because I feel like I've been going through, call it a midlife crisis or awakening, or I don't know what the hell it is, but it's just driving me nuts. I'm trying to sit with it, but we're constantly reinventing ourselves, and just giving ourselves that grace to step into that. Because I know people like to hear the stories of the Olympics, and they love to hear about me hitting my head on the board, and they love to be, those are stories.
Yeah.
And when I tell those stories, I'm giving it energy. So I understand that, because it was really clear, because I used to talk about my abusive relationship. And whenever I would do those types of speeches, because you're reliving it and you're giving energy to it, it always took me 3 days to recover, because you're reliving it, and then you have to let go. And what came to me recently in a meditation, it was about forgiveness. And then I thought, what if there was nothing to forgive? Because God loves us the way that we are, warts and all. I mean, wouldn't it be beautiful if you had nothing to forgive? Because I was thinking, because I was raped, and so, you're a victim, and then you move to survivor, and you forgive your perpetrator. But as long as you hold on to that survivor, you're holding on to a piece of the victim. And also, when you forgive, you're giving a piece of yourself to someone else. So if we were able to be whole and just love them, that's where the alchemy happens. That's where the transformation happens.
And all of the stages that you have moved through have got you here.
Yeah.
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 So I'm curious to ask, You shared with us you're in your midlife crisis, and I'm sure all of us are in some form of crisis, whatever name we give it, the transformation. We should call it transformation storm.
There we go. I love it. Transformation storm. I'm going through a transformation storm.
So your transformation storm right now, I'm not going to hold you to any finite conclusions, because you're still moving through it, as we all do. We all move through these things. What are your epiphanies or insights that are emerging at the moment, if you have any?
Okay, so I doubled up on my meditation, because, that's where the answers are. It's, we start with ourselves. So, and discovery. And it's interesting the things I'm discovering, because I realize that I give my power over, whether it is to have a co-author for my book, or to write a script, or to whatever that is, you're giving up your power. And so
you shared with me the other day that you were doing a script about your story, your life with someone else, and now it's come to you that you might be better doing it by yourself, which for you was an epiphany.
It was huge, because I was meditating, and then these scenes of my life for the script started coming to me. I was like, rather than ignoring this, maybe I should write it down. And so I started writing. It was like, oh wow, and I've been really liking what's coming together and coming out. It's like, oh, okay, I get it. It's like the universe telling me, okay, get off your ass and write it.
Yeah, yeah.
We're always selling ourselves short. That, we can't do it. I'm dyslexic. We put up these barriers and hurdles that actually don't exist. Which is crazy too, when you realize that. It's okay. And just, I'm, being patient with myself and going through it, and just kind of enjoying the ride. It's weird, because I that's the reason why I wanted to co-author, because I didn't want any pretense that I was a writer. But like going through where I am now, it's like, I like what's happening. I like what's coming up. Whether it's going to be anything has yet to be seen, but it feels good.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
It's interesting, actually, because as you say this, I realize something about you. You are somebody whose story goes before him. It's not often true that we meet people whose story goes before them, but actually you have a set of stories around your life, your achievements, your experiences, things that you've had to deal with that have been very public. And I know that, I think it was 20 years ago, was it Mario Lopez played you in a biopic of your life? So you're someone who also follows a spiritual path and a path of awareness. So it must be very interesting to have so many people who meet you be very aware of elements of your story and project that onto you, or their own assumption of what that means for you.
Right.
It kind of makes sense to me that you should write your story, because you're someone whose story has actually had a very positive impact and has been a challenge in culture. Like, it's challenged certain ideas. You've been a pioneer and a challenger to certain stories we had, whether it was about gay people or HIV or even what's possible at the Olympic Games.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes sense to me that you writing your own story is almost like a reset of everything that's happened to you over the last 40 years, where even I had an idea of your story before I met you, with the few things that I knew, because you've been one of those cultural figures whose story has been part of his work in the world.
It's so funny, because I compartmentalized my life for so long.
Good way to survive.
It was.
Big things, when things are happening, that's often the way that we cope.
Yeah, so, I hid my my dance and diving because, you know, when I was in third grade, I did a modern dance routine with that acrobatics and I got beat up for it, you know, and so I was like, okay, it's not safe. It was funny because when I was at the University of Miami, I was doing Equus. I played Nugget in The Young Horseman as a freshman. And our Dr. Dysart, Jimmy Puig, he says, Greg, I know Greg Louganis, the actor, but I understand you dive as well. I was like, yeah, I'm kind of on scholarship for that. But, you know, but for me, that was so gratifying because I always wanted to be accepted in whatever I was doing for what I was doing. You know, so I kept everything separate. You know, I didn't integrate. So integration has been interesting and a challenge for me. So, yeah, I mean, just embracing all those parts of me and let people see the whole package, as it were. You know, because like when I made my professional dance debut, you know, I was a dancer and I was accepted as a dancer. You know, my diving, you know, they didn't know. I mean, I was a regular on American Bandstand. You know, I didn't tell anybody. You know, I kept that separate. You know, any of the acting stuff, I wanted to be, you know, accepted in whatever I was doing, you know, that I was immersed in. So a lot of people know aspects of me. You know, but also for myself and my own well-being and comprehension is I need to integrate all that, you know, and embrace it and not be ashamed of it.
Yeah.
Because I was always told when I was growing up, because both my sister and I are adopted, you know, I remember my mother saying, don't outshine your sister. And that really stuck with me. I was like, okay, so I play everything down.
And why would she be saying that? Do you have an awareness why she wanted you to not outshine your sister?
She was concerned about my sister.
She didn't,
because she's my older
be...
sister.
Okay.
So she's older, you know, and
so was it because you had a wider array of talents, or was it,
Yeah, because like you know, I remember when I was a kid, I taught myself how to swim, but I swam underwater. I was more comfortable under the water and close to the bottom of the pool because I knew I could, you know, pop up. So we started swim lessons at the YMCA, and we were going there, and then all of a sudden we stopped going. And so years later, I asked my mom about that. And she said, yeah, Greg, I pulled you out because you started passing your sister. You know, and she didn't want that to happen. So it was, you know, it really impacted me, you know, as to kind of play small.
Yeah.
You know.
And as someone who, peak performance is innate to you, and here you were being told that you were just doing what was innate to you, which was to peak perform in whatever area you were in. And here you were being told, no, don't do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't, you know, and I mean, I didn't also I didn't always allow those accomplishments to really penetrate because, oh, it's just diving, you know, it's just sports, you know. You know, I'm not graduating summa cum laude or whatever, you know, that, you know, so I never thought I was smart.
Right.
And it wasn't, I was going to a therapist and he said, no, you're a genius physically. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess, yeah, that's it. I didn't interpret that as a form of intelligence. I didn't think that was intelligent at all because it just felt so natural that, oh, if I can do it, anybody can.
And that's usually how we are. Like the things that are usually just innate to us, we don't think are anything special, or it's just, we're just doing what we can, which I think is also the inconvenience sometimes when people want to herald you for things you've achieved in the world and almost stand back. That's a difficult thing, I think, too, because there's a distancing in that rather than, oh, hi, I'm a human, you're a human, let's connect and see who we are. I'm going to put you in the box of, oh, you did this, or you're a man, or you're a woman, and you're, but all the boxes that we live in, whether it's people's achievements or the way we see others, it can be such a barrier to us just connecting as humans.
Right.
Which is really why we're here.
Yeah. I mean, that's a part of the reason why I reached out to you. Because I felt a little lost. I felt, there's a lack of connection. Going through this process, a lot of people, when I'm in a relationship, then I pour myself in, totally. And then, almost, kind of transform to them.
Yeah.
And so then their friends become my friends, their family becomes my family, at the cost of my,
yes,
where I was or who I am. And so then understanding that and having the separation, I think the divorce has been about 3 years, and realizing, wow, a lot of the friends were really Johnny's friends. That because I'm not into pop culture, I'm not into gossip, I'm not into a lot of those things. I'm not into the news, I'm not into politics. They're not interesting to me.
Yeah.
And they're actually exhausting. So in removing myself, I was feeling kind of alone. That, okay, where's my tribe? So I feel like that's my path right now. Is finding
discovery.
Yeah, discovery.
Well, one thing you've shared with me, and you've touched a bit on being adopted, the discovery of your biological family over recent years. Could you share a little about that? Because that's a fascinating journey.
Yeah, it was interesting because I went through a real bad rebellion. I mean, I spent my 13th birthday in juvenile hall. I mean, I was that out of control.
Right.
And so I learned that my father wanted to raise me. So I always wanted to find my dad.
He did want to raise you, but he wasn't able to.
He wasn't able to because my mother was 16. She was underage.
Oh, wow.
So he had no say. So I knew this. One thing I didn't know is he knew where I was. He found out who I was and where I was. Because I was, when I was 11 years old, around 11 years, I think I was 10, 11 years old, I had this gentleman come up to me. He was in a suit, and he hands me his business card, and he said, if you want to know about your dad, give me a call. And I was thinking, oh my God, he's going to tell tales on my dad? I don't want anything to do with this. The father who was raising me. That was my uncle. That was my father's brother. He would to share who my biological father. So back then, I didn't put it together, but when we had the reunion, I think it was in 2014, I went to the reunion and he said, remember when I showed up to your conference? I was like, oh my God, I put it together. But yeah, I've connected to Fuvali Lutu, my dad, and I have a brother and 2 sisters, Malcolm, Sherilyn, and Geraldine.
Wow, and that's fair. That's kind of the last decade all of this has been happening, right?
He came, I was doing an appearance in Honolulu after the 1984 Olympic Games. And so I was there to sign autographs and all that. And he came. I was signing autographs, and then my host comes over to me and said, Greg, your father's here. I said, my father would have told me if he was coming to Hawaii, from San Diego. I said, no, your biological father. I was like, oh. He said, do you want to meet him? I said, yeah. And so I met him. And I was kind of skeptical because it was right after the Olympic Games, and I wasn't quite sure. But through the years, he was, if I went to Hawaii, he was always there. And then he'd show up, to see me off at the airport. It was, he always loading me up with pineapples and chocolate-covered macadamia nuts and coffee and all that to bring home. And he said, if you ever need anything from the islands, let me know, I'll get it to you. And so I knew he never asked for anything. And so I was like, okay, this is probably my dad. So then I did Ancestry.com DNA, found out that he was in fact my dad. And then I went to the reunion, the Lutu family reunion, which was amazing. And it's been wonderful.
Beautiful.
It really is.
A whole new world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a whole new culture.
Yeah.
Because when I was raised, my mother's Scotch-Irish. She was a Texas farm girl. She married my dad, who was Greek. So we were raised in a Greek church, but we were kind of churchgoer. It's just Christmas and Easter, because Easter's a big thing in Greek Orthodox tradition. So we had to learn my mother and I had to learn how to cook Greek for my dad, because his parents died when he was quite young. And so he had 2 older sisters, and they were raised by his yaya.
Yes.
And so he was spoiled. He was the boy of the household.
Right.
And so whenever my mother would try to cook Greek for him, it was never good. It was, oh, my sister's is better, my yaya is better. It was like, so then my mother and I were on a mission. We'd go to the Greek festivals and we'd get the cookbooks from the yayas, and I'd read like 5 recipes. It's like, oh, this sounds good. This sounds good. So I got, some great recipes for spanakopita and baklava, domades, and moussaka. It's like, so, and we got Dad's approval eventually. Yeah. Which was like really cool.
That's awesome. How do you feel about the water now? How do you feel about being in the water, swimming, diving? What is your relationship to it now?
I love the water.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the water. I'm not there a whole lot, but I appreciate it. If I find myself at a pool, I don't find myself at that many pools, but if I find myself at a pool, I'll throw my suit on and I'll get on the boards and I'll play. And it really is, I think it's good for the young divers to see that, when I get in the pool, I do front jumps, I do lineups. It's back to the basics, do fundamentals, foundation. And that's all I do. I rarely do any like flipping and twisting or anything like that. I go back to the basics. And when the kids see that, it's like, oh, wow. So that stuff is really important. I said, yeah, it's really important.
Beautiful.
So that's cool.
Greg, it's been fantastic to talk to you. Of course, we could go so many other places and speak for 3 or 4 hours, but thank you for just bringing yourself, your heart, your wisdom and your presence here. It's really meaningful, not only I think the journey that you've had and what you've represented in the world to so many people in so many different areas, but also just to get to learn more about your experience of all of it. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. This has been really incredible. I really appreciate it.
And where can people find you if they want to follow you on social media or go to your website? Where would be the best place for people to find you?
Well, they can find me, my website's louganis.com. And on all socials, I'm at gregorylouganis.
Perfect.
So pretty easy to find.
Perfect. And you have some fantastic social media videos of you training the dogs and all kinds of fun things. So I highly recommend people give you a follow. But thanks so much, Greg.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. So be sure to check out Greg's work, and we will see you next time on Impact the World.
I attended Soul Magic in Santa Fe this past July, and it recalibrated me in a way that is indescribable. I'm tearing up as I say it. Everyone who attends, not to mention his wonderful team, that holds you in such a safe and beautiful way and allows you to blossom from the inside.
I'm telling you, if you have any hesitation at all about coming, if this is right for you, then come do it. This has been one of the most amazing experiences I've had. This is genuine, it's honest, it is clear, the language is specific, and it is funny.
The agenda and the topics really brought out were tools. These are tools that make us better people. It makes me a better father, makes me a better grandfather, makes me a better husband, and what more could you ask?
Really wonderful not to have to edit or to feel like I need to modify who I am in consideration for the environment, and then I can be really happy really joyful and really just present.